So firstly, everyone, thank you for coming to this session. At Cambridge University Press, we are looking to become a carbon zero company by 2048 and to make our global operations truly sustainable. And as Josh said, I'm Helen Griggs, and as the Global Director for the Environment, Procurement and Supply at the Press and Assessment, it's my job to guide us on that journey. And I want to tell you just a little bit about our journey so far, the reasons for it, and the challenges we've encountered, in the hope that it will help others who want to do likewise in the spirit of sharing knowledge. And we will then invite all of you to ask questions and to discuss the points raised. And we're also here to learn, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from you and your thoughts and questions. So to help me, I've got a distinguished panel of experts who you can see on the webcams, and they will all be introduced shortly. Firstly though, why? And why have we decided to embark on this journey? Cambridge University Press is one of the leading publishers on climate science and sustainability. And we do play a global role in education and research, with our publishing helping to inform and shape the debate on these issues. We're also a global company operating in more than 50 countries and distributing our products around the world. So we do have a responsibility to sort of walk the walk, as well as to publish a talk on climate and sustainability. And we're also part of the wider University of Cambridge, which has its own ambitious climate change initiative in Cambridge Zero, which we'll hear more about shortly, which has also just announced its decision to divest from fossil fuels by 2030 while cutting its own emissions. So as an academic publisher, it's perhaps not surprising that having made a commitment to become carbon zero from energy use, we've also decided to set science-based targets to measure our performance. And what this really means in practice is looking at all of the data and being really honest about the figures, even though some of them will be really hard to find and some even harder to change. So what have we done? In a nutshell, we have tracked our data under the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, Scopes 1 and 2, and are attempting to do the same for Scope 3. For the uninitiated, Scope 1 covers the direct emissions from activities under our control, like the buildings we own and our fleet vehicles, and Scope 2 is the indirect emissions from our electricity we purchase. Scope 3 is where things get really tricky, because that covers the emissions from third parties and things beyond our control, such as the buildings we lease, procurement, business travel, distribution of goods, and so on. But more on that in a moment. What did we find? So for Scopes 1 and 2, it's good news. In the UK, we are on track to become carbon zero before 2048, which has really been helped by the fact that we purchase all of our energy in our UK operations from renewable sources. We've also installed solar panels in our UK office in 2019, which currently provides around 20% of our energy needs. And this year, for the first time, we've set out to track this data globally. We've been liaising with colleagues in our international offices, and we sent reports for them to complete, adapting where operations and local contexts are different. So for Scope 3, which as many publishers who've been dealing with the science-based targets know, this is really accounting for our biggest share of our carbon footprint and really highlights the challenges in any environmental journey that anybody takes, irregardless of their industry. Becoming carbon zero for Scope 3 emissions is going to be really hard, both because of the size and because of so much of them are out of our control, as I said earlier. But we've started, and we've started requesting information from our suppliers. We've been reviewing our travel policies, and it's definitely worth looking into, because a better picture of our carbon footprint really does let us measure our progress meaningfully and set targets which will have a real impact for the future. We are in process of working through the data with an external consultant who will help us set us those all-important science-based targets and have a governance and structure around them to ensure that we have a strategy and true accountability around them. However, we are still learning. And in the past few weeks, we've been looking at the carbon footprint of our digital services. And quite frankly, it's not clear. And like many of you, we use third-party cloud data service providers. And we're not in control of their environmental policies. But we are looking into tools for measuring this, and that will come through on some question and answers later, and some of the options for making greener choices here. However, I think a big success is a consideration for anyone thinking about this journey has been the support from all the colleagues in both press and assessment and the university. Most care strongly about this, and lots of them have given lots of their time and expertise to make a change happen in our organisations. We've set up working groups in key areas such as travel, energy, food, product and paper, supply chain and freight, to generate ideas from colleagues and also working initiatives that then become part of our business as usual. And one conspicuous success has really been the removal of our plastic and paper cups from our water coolers and staff restaurants in the favour of colleagues using their own. And then with the replacement of plastic food and packaging and cutlery, which contributed to 79% of our reduction in general waste in our operation in the UK in 2019. So that is a really quick overview of where we are. But before we go to the panel and to your questions, I thought you'd also like just to see a very short video featuring some of the colleagues and their take on the journey so far that I've been discussing. And with that, thank you, and I'll hand you to Josh in the video.
We believe that we can do more to support the climate research community. That's why we've launched 2 new element series on environmental humanities and Earth system governance. Both of these series are transdisciplinary, and we're excited by their potential to really break down disciplinary boundaries in the climate space.
The first project in early 2019 was to install solar up on our roof. We're very fortunate here in that we have a large flat roof area, so we were able to install a solar system of considerable size, 547 kilowatts. This system will give us a carbon reduction of 233 tonnes every year, and also will save in excess of £50,000 on our energy bills.
First of all, we've improved how we deal with compostable waste management by moving to a plant which specialises in anaerobic digestion, and this has enabled us to dispose of our vegware and food waste in a much more environmentally friendly way, converting the food waste into fertiliser. We've also finished off our project to install energy efficient LED lighting into our office in Coventry, and recently commissioned new e-vehicle charging points in our car park and our main building at the Triangle in Cambridge.
We have a big job on our hands because the largest source of emissions is our Scope 3 emissions from our product and paper, but we are making steps to try and make a dent in those figures by making small changes to our packaging, through sustainable procurement and through reducing the volume of paper that we're using, as well as always reviewing the quality and what we can do working with our partners, our suppliers, the Book Chain Project, other publishers, to try and move the industry forward with more environmentally sustainable practices to contribute to our net zero targets in partnership with the university.
These are very grassroots kind of changes that we're making, but some of them are quite challenging. They range from things like removing single-use cups from our cafeteria area and replacing them with ceramic mugs, and also things like how is our waste being removed? Are we recycling correctly? And recently we're working on projects around printing. How can we reduce printing in the office? This is a challenging group because we work across lots of different offices, but you can also really see the changes that we're all making. And it's something that a lot of colleagues can bring their day-to-day experience into the office as well.
So we've been doing a lot of plant-based eating kind of campaigns because the science is really clear about plant-based diet is one of the sort of single biggest things you can do in terms of greenhouse gases, land use, water use, biodiversity, antibiotic resistance, and more. So we sort of started off in January 2019, Kate.
Yeah, so it started off with a kind of Veganuary lunch club with people who'd signed up to eat a vegan diet for the month of January. Started out with about 10 people, and by 2020, this year, we had about 50 people signed up from all around the globe, from Spain to the US to Manila. It was pretty amazing.
We even had our best-selling author, Mike Berners-Lee, come in to do a lunch and learn session with all the colleagues and talk about his book, There's No Planet B, which was hugely successful.
I think there really are things we can all do to be part of a movement that really pushes much more strongly, pushes for change much more strongly than just cutting our own carbon, which is part of it.
So I think that was a really interesting video for all of us to see what our colleagues are doing at the press, and how we've been working together. Before we start with our Q&A session, which I'm going to chair for us today, we wanted to give Vicky Evans and Amy Budd from Cambridge Assessment a chance to tell us a bit about what they're doing at Assessment, and the journey in terms of the environment over there. So Vicky and Amy, over to you guys.
Hi everybody, we thought it would just be useful to give you a little introduction to Cambridge Assessment, which might be an organisation you're perhaps not 100% familiar with. So we're a sister organisation of Cambridge University Press. We're also part of the university. So we are an international exam group, and we run 3 main examination boards covering qualifications across the globe. That includes Oxford and Cambridge Research, or OCR, which provides mainly GCSEs and A-levels for UK students. We also have Cambridge Assessment International Education, which is Amy's area expertise, who provides qualifications across the globe, international GCSEs and AS and A-levels for a range of different schools in a number of different countries. We also have Cambridge English, who are a leading qualification provider for English qualifications in a range of different areas and requirements. So our journey towards going carbon zero has been a little bit slower than the press, I think it's safe to say. We've mainly been focused on moving some of our operations. So we undertook a big project to move all of our Cambridge-based colleagues into a brand new building called the Triangle, which was designed specifically to massively reduce our energy consumption, to give us the capability to undertake a lot more work in this area. So over 2017 to 2019, that's been a main focus for us, but we've managed to significantly reduce our carbon emissions as a result of moving to that building. But now we're turning our attention to look at some of those more complex areas and really trying to build some science-based targets, learning from the journey that the press has been on, focusing on scope 1 and 2 data, and then beginning to wrestle with scope 3 and all the complex areas that we know that's going to cover. Amy, would you like to add anything else?
I don't think so. I would just say that I think what's been where perhaps what we've been doing is things have been happening in different parts of the organisation in perhaps smaller ways, and now we're looking at how actually we can bring that up and have a much more strategic and planned approach, and also that we're really listening closely to our schools who are asking us what are we doing in this space and looking to us to show some leadership. So we're stepping up to do that. We're working alongside the press and learning from the press and what they've discovered so far.
Thank you so much, Vicky and Amy. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and you've obviously seen our faces on the screen for a little bit now. So let me quickly introduce you to everyone on the panel today. My name is Andri. I am a product manager at the press in the academic division, and I am involved in a lot of different sustainability things, but specifically looking at digital sustainability in academic at this stage as well. Next up, we have Hannah Patrick, who is our interdisciplinary publisher for sustainability in the academic division. We also have Helen Griggs, who you've already met, who is our driving force for all things environment. We also have Vicky Evans, who's our newly appointed Joint Sustainability Manager. She's obviously at assessment, but we have a board that sits across both companies, and Vicky is part of that board to get us jointly there. We also have Amy Budd, who is Head of Brand, Digital and New Services at Assessment. And like myself, she's one of the grassroots driving forces on a colleague level. And we were the ones kind of asking the questions and, you know, getting it out there. And then we also have Stephanie Attal with us today from the Book Chain Project, which is a collaborative project with sorry, Stephanie, I forgot what's the company's name again? With Carnstone. Carnstone, sorry, with Carnstone, and as mentioned in our video as well, the Book Chain Project is they help us with all things sustainability in terms of our workflows, and have helped us a lot on our journey, especially around paper up to this stage. But we're also looking into digital with them as well. So without further ado, we thought a nice way to maybe start off this discussion with everyone, because we have such a diverse group together, is to start off by looking at what is how does our research influence our, how does the environmental changes influence our research, and what's we specifically work with Cambridge Zero. How are we working with Cambridge Zero at the university, and what are we doing in that front? So I'm going to hand that over to Hannah.
There we go. Thanks. So for people who don't know, Cambridge Zero is a relatively newly established network or institution or initiative at the university, designed to bring together all of the different researchers and projects and institutes at the university who are all looking at different facets of environmental research. And I think for us, working with Cambridge Zero is sort of a natural extension of the way that we collaborate with the university across lots of different projects. I think for us, it's really exciting because we do have a lot of sort of joint aims of generating and disseminating those ideas, and that can, you know, shape that transition to becoming a zero carbon world. And one of the things that they're really focused on as well is interdisciplinarity and bringing together all of the different subject areas where there are people doing this research and getting it in front of the bigger, broader research community. And I think that's, as you might be able to tell from my job description, something that we're quite excited about as well, sort of the potential in interdisciplinarity and forging connections and breaking down those traditional boundaries to bring out new ideas. And I think that's sort of the key of how we want to collaborate with them. It's still very early to talk about specific projects. I can talk about the first collaboration, which is the Cambridge Zero Climate Festival, which we're working with Cambridge Zero to host next month now. And I think that kind of speaks to what I'm talking about, because that's going to be bringing together all kinds of different sessions, right through from stories and games that are aimed at children to panel discussions and then academic papers and the latest scientific research. So it's really trying to demonstrate that whole idea of the power of bringing people together and sharing that knowledge as broadly as possible, and how that is a way to affect change. And it chimes perfectly with what we want to do as publishers in terms of getting research out there.
Thank you, Hannah. And I think that's so important to note, because the press is a well-known environmental publisher. It's one of the key factors that helped us win the Independent Publisher Guild Sustainability Award this year. So it just kind of fits with what the press is all about. Helen, I don't know if you want to expand a little bit more on what we do with Cambridge Zero on a business level.
Yeah, sure. So just operationally, we're aligning with the strategies and plans for the Carbon Zero by 2048. And we've got lots of collaborative projects happening. So we're looking at data collection tools, so how we can, across the 3 organisations, collate all the data that we've got globally to then give us governance and structure, and then also KPIs and measurement tools as to how we're actually going to meet the science and the Paris Agreement. There's going to be lots of projects coming through, like Hannah said. We've also been looking at having some interns or graduates start to research into the digital space as to the impact on our digital publishing and our content that we publish online. So there could be some really interesting research out there and open access.
Thank you so much, Helen. So Hannah, one more question for you is, as a university press, what do you think is the conversations that we should be having with our authors, with our journal partners? And I guess this is something that any publisher can go out and take to their authors. But what conversation should we have with our customers on that level around the environment, around changing behavior?
Thanks. So I think, in one sense, the conversation that we need to have with authors or publishing partners is really a lot of the same conversations that we're sort of having within the industry. And I think a lot of it comes from just being very open with them about the challenges that we're facing. At the press, at least, you know, the aims and the ambitions that we have, because we do have serious commitments in this space. So I think a lot of it is going to be around about, do we need to be so wedded to print? Are there other options that we can try? Are there ways that we can work with our authors who are already part of the research community to help us understand how we can get people to engage maybe with more digital products and different ways of using and presenting research that might actually mean that we can be more environmentally friendly in how we share that? And then, I mean, there's really tangible things like how do we send out journal copies to maybe member organisations, you know, the wrapping, the shipping methods, all of those sorts of really concrete things. And then I think it's something that's come up a lot already with COVID over the last few months, but thinking about how we attend conferences, and maybe for authors and journal partners, how are we going to promote their products differently? Because I think the days of attending a really massive conference schedule and sending lots and lots of physical copies of things to conference stands are really behind us, and there are better ways of doing that in terms of our carbon footprint, but also in terms of actually engagement and impact for them as authors. So I think that's a conversation that we need to start having more, and probably already are, but yeah.
That's great. And it's great that it's all coming together like that. And Vicky and Amy, from an assessment side, what issues around the climate crisis, how has this affected your qualifications and the assessment programs that assessment offers? Because you work a lot more with schools, and as Amy mentioned, these questions have come in from the schools. This is our young generation. So how has climate change affected what you guys do at assessment?
I think it's so we already offer a number of qualifications that address issues like sustainability and biodiversity loss in particular subjects. So in the sciences and geography, and a suite we've got called Global Perspectives. But I think what it's, as the issue has become more impactful, we're starting to think about how can we use the curriculum to increase knowledge and understanding around those issues, and what more can we do? So not just necessarily discrete subjects, but what other opportunities have we got? And I know that our OCR, so our organisation in the UK, are looking at GCSE and natural history, and that's around helping young learners really connect and feel more closer to nature. So I think really it's about looking at all opportunities we have to help increase that knowledge and understanding.
Perfect. That sounds like a very holistic approach, and in the end, that's what we want. So shifting gears a little bit to the business side, because a lot of what we do as publishers is processes. So firstly, I think something that everyone would kind of on the call would want to know is, we have set science-based targets, Helen, am I correct, to measure our footprint. So why have we set these targets, and why have we set it? How are we getting there? How are we getting to measure them? But maybe from your and Vicky's side, Helen, but then also Stephanie, from your side, is it worth publishers or companies in general setting science-based targets? Is this the way we should go? So maybe let's start off with Helen and Vicky, and then we'll go to you, Stephanie.
Yeah, really good question. So setting the science-based targets, I think, like I said, it's not the easiest method to go down, but it certainly gives you a real clear governance and structure as to focal areas. It's also a global sort of strategy and set of governance. So everybody who sets their own science-based targets, we're all looking at the same areas. So in scope 3, it's travel, it's your supply chain, your upstream and downstream, it's your commute to work, it's your investments that you make as a company. So it just gives everyone that really clear baseline of what to look at. And then when you collate the data, you can then, very simply, what we've been doing is putting it into Excel sheets, and you can quickly see on the graph the key areas that you need to focus on. So for us as a publisher, and like other publishers that might be listening, we know the freight, the supply chain and the paper and couple of the real key areas, because that's what we do as a business. It's certainly not easy to set the targets, and some of the parts of the scopes and the aspects, as I call them, the technology needs to keep up and move and go faster. So the infrastructure for electric vehicles, for example, in the UK and other countries, it's not there. So if we wanted to change all our fleet, for example, to electric tomorrow, great, we could do that. It's a cost, but then you haven't got the infrastructure set up for charging those cars everywhere in the world. So the technology's got to catch up as well. So it's an interesting challenge that we're going to have over the next couple of years. And Vicky, I don't know if you want to add anything to your journey.
Yeah, I think as well, having those science-based targets in place really helps Preston Assessment and the university to communicate its impact in a global sense. We're both global organisations. Both strongly believe in our responsibility to our learners and our communities. So with those targets in place, it's much more easy for us to align ourselves with things like the UN Global Compact, for example, and to demonstrate how we are contributing to an improvement in sustainability across the world. But without that level of detail, it's really, really hard for us as organisations to understand where we can, have the most impact and benefit our learners and communities most effectively. I think that's been the biggest takeaway for me starting this journey, actually.
And Stephanie, on your side.
Yeah, so I'm answering the third part. Is it worth it? I think the key thing is having a science-based target is becoming almost business as usual for more and more companies. I think in 2016 there was almost no companies kind of committing to a science-based target, and by 2019 we had over 500, and we've just pushed the mark of 1,000 just recently in September. So there's this growing kind of recognition that this is where we need to that this is what we need to do to ensure that we meet the Paris Agreement and limit our global warming by below 2 degrees or even well below 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees. And with, I think there's a trend going up around the your Cambridge Zero or the SBTI, the Science Based Target Initiative Net Zero new process that they're developing to get companies to do that. So they're pushing that science-based target to make sure that we halve the emissions by 50% globally by 2030, which is what the IPCC said we need to do to meet the Paris Agreement, and almost completely get to net zero by mid-century. So I think it's definitely a kind of a growing trend. And it's something that we need to meet those global commitments that we have for our planet. It's also some companies are doing science-based targets through the Science Based Targets Initiative, so having them approved through that initiative. and that gives that external recognition as well. So it went through a thorough methodology and process, and you get that kind of sign off almost of your target by independent NGOs like WRI or WWF or CDP. And the whole world, I think the last point I want to make is the whole work is going towards that net zero kind of commitments and the reduction of emissions, and whether it's governments, NGOs, businesses. So it's almost for businesses kind of a way to future-proof your business a little bit, because if governments are now implementing policies around that by kind of having those targets now, you're almost kind of in line with how the world is evolving and how your business evolving with it.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's quite a bit of work to put it up, but as this is a big problem that we need to solve, we need a big solution, and at the end the science-based targets is what we need to do that. So I think another thing that a lot of people would be interested in is what our goal date is as assessment, the press, and the university. How are we working towards our combined goal? There's the 2048 date, there's 2030. Helen, maybe you can start us off, and then we can go to Vicky, to you from the assessment side as well.
Yeah, and as you said, there are many dates, and the university have declared the 2030 and the divestment, etc. And then they have a global target of 0 by 2048. They've been working on the science-based targets for a number of years, and I think, open and honestly, us as a press, we've only been really focusing on the scope and the baselining of the data for the last year and a half. So we're really pushing and working hard to get aligned with the university as quick as we can. Again, like I said earlier, the scope 1 and 2, UK, the energy, the fleet, most probably going to be the easier area for us to declare a different date at some point. But globally, we need to talk to each of the regions and find out what's happening locally, what's the infrastructure like in each of the countries that we're all working in globally, and then the scope 3 pieces as well. Again, there's data that we can't even get at the moment. So again, digital service providers, we don't have the data coming from them. The warehouses we use, we don't have the KPI and the methodologies coming through. And when I've been talking to the printers, again, they haven't been asked to calculate their greenhouse gas emissions. So this is all new to a lot of people within this sector of the industry. So I think, while we're slightly behind, we're really running fast to catch up and get our data set.
And Vicky, from
Vicky, did you want to add anything?
There's probably not a huge amount more to add from my side. I'd say we're press are trying to catch up. We sort of feel like we're sprinting really fast behind them to try and catch up, even in an even shorter time frame. But absolutely, I mean, we continue to align with the university and university principals and the 2048 net zero targets. But so we're just at the start of our journey. We've only just begun to analyse our scope 1 and 2 data. Now we've had our initial reports back from our consultants, and it looks encouraging that we will be able to align with press targets. But as I say, it really depends on what happens when we start digging into those more complex areas of emissions around scope 3.
Yeah. So I think we're hearing a lot about it's going to be change in the way we're working. Stephanie, you with the Book Chain project, you work with a lot of different publishers. What would you say is how can publishers make sure that we're shifting gears in the right way to start to learn from our mistakes and now start create books and journals and products that are more sustainable? Where should we start as publishers? What should we look into?
Yeah, that's a good question, Andri. I think first of all, it's not so much more about kind of learning from your mistake. I think it's about learning along the way. I think there's new technologies, new things coming up, and new issues that we didn't know in the past that are coming up. So it's more about looking at those emerging issues, those new challenges, and kind of understanding how we can address them and have a positive impact on the environment. you know, the key thing is through the book chain project and looking at the environment piece of the book chain project, we look at issues like deforestation, which has an indirect impact on climate change. I was looking at a stat earlier around the IPCC, you know, 13% of the anthropogenic emissions are due to deforestation and land use. So that's kind of a big part. You will be looking at, you mentioned, I think Helen, you mentioned, or someone else mentioned biodiversity is another big kind of coming up issue with the UN report that came out in September. So the key things to do, I guess, for the publishing industry is to start looking at your supply chain. I think that's where the biggest impacts are, and understanding where the greenhouse gas reduction opportunities are. So it's about looking at your raw materials and understanding the supply chains of each of your raw materials. For paper, for example, and I'm using paper because that's what we do on book chain, you know, tracing the origin of the paper. Where was it produced? Where does the pulp come from? Where does the trees come from? What tree species do we use? You know, are those endangered species? Is this part of an illegal law? You know, kind of doing that traceability around the paper to understand how the paper was made is one key thing. And then for the rest of the supply chain, because you don't just have paper. Paper is one of many different material supply chain. I think it's about understanding the concept of designing for sustainability, which is a kind of a growing concept. It's about thinking about the sustainability and how you can make your products that have no environmental impact or even a positive environmental impact from your design early on in your conversation with illustrators or authors and through the design phase and all the way down to the printing phase. And that's, you know, understanding the recyclability of your products, understanding the impact of using different inks, different adhesives. So it's just looking at all of that and kind of understanding the trade-offs, I guess, between the life of the long shelf life of a product and designing for sustainability as well.
That's really interesting. Yeah, Helen.
And sorry, just Andri, if you don't mind, just like with, you know, with the paper and where we purchase the paper from in the mills, I think this is where a collective voice, when we're talking to the industry, so whether it be the printers or the mills, you know, we are all on this journey together. And I think if we can combine our thoughts and our collective voice to say, you know, we do want to be having paper from non-deforested sources, and we do want to have our shrink wrap that goes on our pallets, which moves our product around the world, we do want that to be recyclable and truly recyclable. And I think that's where we will get more momentum. And I think that's where we as an industry can help change what other parts of the industry and the world does at the same time.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think, I mean, a lot of what's been said as well is that there's been a big shift to digital, and the COVID situation has obviously done that as well. And that's a slightly different way of looking at it, because we're quite, you know, we know what the processes are, what we need to look in for paper. We just kind of need to start doing it. But on the digital side, I mean, I know myself, it's a bit more challenging. Helen has said that. I'd be really interested to know from both press and assessment side what this big shift to digital has had, and how we can make sure that we are responsible with our digital carbon footprint that we're emitting with our digital products. How should we be designing these products? How should we be putting them out there? Maybe Amy, Vicky, from your side, from assessment, and then we can go to Helen and Stephanie.
I mean, I think I would say from what we're doing, what we really need to understand, and it was said earlier, wasn't it, what that carbon footprint is of digital, because it's quite easy to say, well, what we'll do is we won't do this in print anymore, we'll move it to digital. But I don't think we understand enough about what that impact is. But definitely in terms of behaviour that we're seeing and the ways that we're working, especially brought about by COVID, has meant that we are naturally shifting to be more digital, and, you know, difficulties with dispatching physical things around the world. Obviously we're looking at digital alternatives, but I think it's definitely in that understanding piece that we need to make sure that we're making the right decisions there. Vicky, would you add anything?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us as well as an assessment organisation, we have the sort of the added complexity of how we actually operationalise our exams, you know, for a number of really good reasons to do with validity and fairness. Most of those are conducted on paper, and there's a very established way of doing that, and we can't just make automatic switches over to digital. That would have to be a very strategic approach depending on the qualification that you're talking about. So there's quite a lot of number of layers of complexity to, you know, to assessment in general and how you approach assessment before we could sort of whole scale move to digital.
And I think from a digital space, I think the other thing to really think about is when we are, you know, even marketing online, you know, that video that you load up, you know, how much is data is that going to take to just download it? And again, we don't know what that impact is at the moment. We don't know if the impact between a laptop and somebody on a mobile phone, we don't know what the carbon footprint is and the differences. So I think, again, I think that's where, again, as a collective, we just really need to start asking these questions of all of our suppliers. And, you know, we have started to do that in our sort of our top suppliers from a digital and technology perspective within the press. And we just need to keep pushing for those answers. Lots of us are using the same service providers, the big players, AWS, and I think we just have to keep pushing that question to them to get answers coming out. It's, again, you know, it's a space that I know and very aware that we need help, we need support, and we need tools that also can help measure it, because again, it's going to be very different regionally. And how do we then work out the difference between somebody downloading in the UK to somebody in South Africa or Australia? And you know, we just don't have that data set at the moment. It's going to be an interesting couple of years, I think, in this space.
Stephanie, you can talk to that in terms of a tool, can't you?
Yeah, I can, absolutely. And I think everyone already said it. I think the interesting thing is it's still very early days. I mean, digital's been around for a while, but it's still we haven't seen it in the past as one of those carbon intensive kind of industries, but it's something that's kind of appearing more and more now, and it's really interesting. It's that same concept as was Scope 3, right? It's not our emissions, it's someone else's emissions. So how do you do that? And that kind of adds the challenge of how do you measure, you know, that emissions, that's someone else's emissions. So how do you measure the emissions from the data centers to someone using their Kindle? You know, kind of that upstreaming that or downstreaming that supply chain, and how do you measure that? And there's a recently launched collaborative project with researchers from University of Bristol and other media companies who are looking to answer that exact question. So it's called DIMPACT, and the aim of that project is really to develop a simple calculator for a complex problem, you know, and where companies would be able to provide simple inputs like you know, the type of content, the type of audiences, then how they view the content, and then calculate those emissions from that data center that houses the content up all the way up to the user and the iPad or other devices that they're using. So that's something, that's a question that's being asked, and a group, again, a collaborative mind and a collaborative thinking, a group came together to try and put that together.
Yeah, and I've seen a demo of that tool, and I think it's something that we at the press are very interested in getting involved in, because it is simple, but it really does start to answer these big questions that we have. So personally, I'm very interested in that. So we've had some questions in from the audience as well, and a lot of them are around what can learners, teachers, what can our customers that we provide our books and our journals and our products for, what can they do to help us on this journey to be more sustainable as publishers? I think this is kind of a question for everyone, so I don't know, Hannah, do you maybe want to? Yeah, so whoever would like to start on that, maybe.
I guess from some aspects, I guess it's thinking about, do we need a physical book? You know, we have proven over the period of COVID that we can do a lot more online, and do we need to physically print it? And again, some of it could be down to, you know, paper that's used or the shrink wrap on the journal? You know, could we then look at paper, for example? So I think it's just thinking differently, thinking about what we've been through over the last few months and asking us and challenging us to change and what we publish and how we do it and how we deliver it.
Yeah, and I would add to that in terms of, I think it's really helpful to hear from our schools how they experience us, and you know what they get from us at the end, and we're definitely getting that feedback through from our schools and from teachers about what, you know, they're challenging, exactly what Helen said, they're challenging us to say, actually, do you need to do it like this? Could you do it like that instead? And we're also hearing and having, I think it's about conversations and dialogue, and we're also hearing directly from our learners about how important the issue of the climate crisis is to them and how we can support them with their knowledge and understanding of that. And we're acutely aware that, you know, the school strikers of today are going to be the school leaders of tomorrow, and then they'll be working directly with us. So we need to be having that conversation and in the same space as them, I think.
And Hannah, would you say there's more that we want researchers to ask us, to challenge us in the way that we're providing services to them?
I think so. I think in a sense, what Amy has just said is what really applies. It's about that feedback and bringing that challenge to us. I mean, in the academic space, we're talking about working with the people who are trying to solve these big questions. And I think if they're able to come to us with ideas or ways that we can change, or also maybe thinking about how academia as a whole has to change, and therefore what we do as a publisher, how we support our customers, what role we actually play, helping us to challenge that, instead of always maybe thinking about, you know, we take a piece of research and we publish it, whether that's in a book or a journal. Just how can we do that differently? How can we better be an integrated part of the research community and find new ways? And I think it is going to be about working together, because, you know, they've got the science, hopefully we've got the understanding of the publishing side of things, and, you know, how can we bring that together to find new ways of doing things?
Okay. I think another great question that we just got in from the audience is, what exactly does carbon zero mean? We have all these terms flying around. So maybe Stephanie, if you maybe want to start us off on like an industry kind of definition of what does carbon zero mean?
This is an excellent question. It's changing, actually. The definition of carbon zero is changing. I think in the past it meant you are not emitting any emissions, or you know, it didn't include offsetting or compensation, and that mindset is now changing. So it's carbon zero is essentially about neutralizing whatever emissions you're coming in. So it's trying to reduce. It's not emitting any. It's having, you know, at the end of the day of the calculation, you have zero carbon in the atmosphere. You've either reduced, eliminated, or compensated through different other means your emissions to reach that zero state.
And would that include things like offsetting?
It didn't used to, but more and more it is, and there's very different definitions of offsetting, and offsetting would be part of the solution, but it is the last. I think it's widely recognized that it is the last step of your carbon management strategy. So first you would try to reduce your emissions that are in your control, so your scope 1 and 2. Then you try to reduce your emission in your value chain, which are your scope 3, and then you offset. And then in the offsetting you've got different types of offsetting measures. Is whether you are actually drawing carbon out of the atmosphere, or you're putting projects in place to try and reduce or avoid emissions and calculate the offset from the avoidance. So there's different schools of thoughts on that.
And I think the reduction and then getting to zero, again, that's where some of the technology and the infrastructure around the globe has to also catch up with what we need to do to hit the 2050 date and the 1.5 degrees. Because without some of that technology and some of the big industries changing, you know, it's going to be a big challenge. You know, offsetting, you know, we haven't looked at offsetting as a business as yet. But I think the science-based targets have said that offsetting potentially could come into play at some point, but it's not something that we've looked at. But when you do look at it, you have to be really careful and look at their supply chains to make sure that they're truly green and they're not just offering a high-level strategy to say they're offsetting, and actually when you drill into it, they're actually not. So I think offsetting is something that, again, I think interesting conversations for the next 6 months to a year on whether that's actually going to be truly what we should be doing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, Helen, you said now, you know, if we're partnering with someone and in terms of offsetting, but in general, considering our goals and what we want to do and what we need to report on, how does that influence our third parties that we're partnering with in terms of what they need to report on for us and you know, what they need from us if we want to partner with them?
Yeah, so I think from the sort of the third parties, I think that's where we're really starting to ask the questions of all of our third parties. What are their environmental targets? Are they looking at science-based targets? We have got various initiatives that we could look at the suppliers and ask them to set a science-based target for their own industry in the next 5 years. So there's 2 or 3 different ways that you can look at your third parties, but at present we're just looking at who are we using and where are they today and what are their ambitions, and then there'll be decisions made about how we move forward with that, whether it be that we start to get them to request the same of their supply chain and so on.
And I guess the key idea with an offsetting project or an offset project is the idea of additionality. So it's asking that question as whether or not the offset project has led to actual savings that would not have happened otherwise, which is some of the challenges with measuring offsets as well. It's like, did I make that happen? Did that project make it happen? Did my funding create that saving, or would it have happened anyway without my intervention?
I think another kind of theme that's coming through from the questions, we've spoken about it, we've touched on it a little bit here, but what impact has the COVID pandemic had on our journey in terms of sustainability? So yeah, I'd like to open this up to kind of everyone on the panel. So yeah, maybe Helen, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, sure. I think obviously with the pandemic and everyone just having to work from home straight away, there was an instant change and impact, you know, on travel, how we market, how we even move product around the world at one point. You know, we had various printers and locations, warehouses that couldn't actually operate. So I think it just made us all look differently at our whole operation from the outset. I think one thing that I'm hoping from the COVID as a positive, because there's not many, is that we all do start to think differently moving forward and that we don't revert back into the old ways. So that we do think about, you know, do we need to print 1,000 books, or do we need to send that marketing post-it note via air freight to an exhibition, because actually it's all virtual now. So I think it's this, we've got to learn from what we've been forced into to help the environment moving forward.
And adding to that from the assessment perspective as well, we're really starting to see evidence that, you know, we have an engaged group of employees, but that's widening out as a result of COVID, that we're seeing, you know, colleagues who perhaps weren't engaged in this issue previously talking about, oh, this means that I must be reducing my carbon because I'm not coming into the office, and that sort of the understanding of sustainability is widening out across the organisation. And I think now also with everybody working from home, it's given us an opportunity to address some of our sort of broader sustainability responsibilities around sort of flexible working and gender equality, and sort of like a bigger issue, some bigger issues, and how we tackle that and how we become an organisation that really promotes a sense of belonging for everybody. What does that mean when we're all working virtually?
Yeah, definitely. And Vicky, you mentioned, you know, more colleagues being aware of sustainability and the environment now, not working in the office. How can publishers and companies in general really harness that grassroots kind of questions that come in and all that enthusiasm in the same way that I think the press and assessment have started doing very successfully? So can you share a bit more around that journey?
Sure. Well, I think it's no secret for us that our the increased pace of our journey towards carbon zero has really come about as a result of some really passionate colleagues across assessment. We have a very proactive staff network who are a very engaged group of individuals who've really driven a number of fantastic initiatives over the last couple of years, particularly around things like plastic reduction, encouraging changes to travel policy, that sort of thing. And we've always believed in making those people feel empowered to run with the change, that this isn't necessarily this isn't a top-down movement. This is something that we want everybody to feel part of. I think it's important to recognise there's still quite a long way to go. I think that we're moving from what's been a lot of people acting as early adopters across the organisation, that we need to get to a point now where we're moving to a more formal programme, that we are taking much more accountability across the business for the work that has been done. And that is a lot more about engagement at high levels of the organisation, really building this into strategy and policy, but continuing to work with those individuals who, at the end of the day, they're the champions, and they're the ones who are going to drive the real change across the organisation. They're the people who have to think sustainably every day. Did you want to add anything, Amy? Because Amy's a very proactive member of our staff network.
I think that the challenge is, how do you so there's that really group of committed, enthusiastic people who have driven a lot of the change and who are behind the business saying more, faster, bolder, but how do you then translate that into every member of staff? And because at the end of the day, we need to make such big changes. It's about every single individual understanding their role in that, feeling some responsibility for that as well, and being part of driving that change. So I think that feels to me like that's the next challenge, perhaps for both organisations. So how do you move from that tight group of people to widen it out and start getting everybody involved, I think.
Yeah, that I 100% agree with that as well. So we're just about on the hour. I think maybe if we can wrap up with any final lessons that we've learned over the last year, if anyone wants to share, that would be great. Just maybe 1 or 2 sentences. Helen, would you maybe like to start?
Yes, of course. I think for me, it's really listen to your colleagues, people who are really passionate about the environment, listen to them, communicate what we're doing, and also just get the data and understand the data. And I think that's where I've learned so much over the last year on my journey with the science-based targets.
Yeah, and to echo what you said, Helen, I think get the data and engage with your supply chain. I think get the data, find out your hotspot, and build capability within your supply chain. No one can do it alone. It's across the whole value chain. And that's one of the core purposes of the book chain and what we do, and try and collect greenhouse gas data across and help everyone then drive reduction as well. It's not, it's data, but also driving that reduction.
Thank you so much, everyone. I think we have to unfortunately wrap up. This was a wonderful discussion. We had some questions around, will the session be recorded? And I think, Josh, we will probably record it and post it somewhere online to access as well. So keep an eye on our social media channels where you can see that. Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate this, and excited to see where we will be in a year's time on this journey. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andri.
Bye.